All right, here's where we're headed today. We're going to point out so you can avoid some common mistakes in budgeting. We're going to talk about how do you even estimate or project what income might be. Let's talk about startup costs, and then we're going to look at our church planning budget template tool and start filling in some numbers and kicking the tires, even if that's just a practice one for today that you throw away, or maybe it's the one that you'll use for whatever it is that you turn into Sean eventually with the budget stuff. Certainly it's a tool that's built to be used like real-time live when you're in the trenches planting. And there's a couple of scriptures for us this morning. Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. So that is the spirit of budgeting. It's always a tension, right, between do we lead with vision and faith and almost blind faith, maybe on one end, forcing God to provide, or do we, the other end maybe is that, what do we call it, like a scarcity mentality, like this is all we have, so this is only what we're going to do, and somewhere in between there is the diligent plans and faith. 1 Timothy, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. All right. Before we get into more, I'm just curious, so I can take a quick poll, like where are you guys at as far as experience with creating budgets for churches? Could you just give me the 60-second version, each of you? What have or haven't you done?
I have very little. Thanks, Pat. That's less than 60, so I would like a refund for the rest of my time.
I cede my time to the distinguished gentleman from...
I have about 20 years of ministry experience, budgets ranging from small to medium to large mega churches, ministries, and also a church planning budget experience too as well. So,
all right, you should be teaching the class. I'll call you off. Corey, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've like Kane, I don't have a lot of experience. I've seen a lot of budgets, but like to actually make a budget for a church, I don't have any experience with that.
Toby?
As far as churches, I've not experienced in churches. I've owned 12 different business and ran companies up to $40 million. So I can create budgets, but just not done a church budget.
I bet you'll find that the principles are the same, just a couple of nuances to consider. Carl, how about you?
I've budgeted for personal finance, but as far as for a church budget, I've handled a small $5,000 youth budget from time to time, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's pretty common that as you're coming into church planting, maybe you've had, I certainly hope you've had personal budgeting experience. Again, principles apply. And maybe you've seen a departmental budget, or just like, here's what you're in charge of. But the whole umbrella of the whole organization maybe is a little bit different. So let us jump into some common church planting mistakes to avoid, budgeting mistakes, that is. So this is representative of a very typical first draft budget. If I start working with a planter and say, hey, send me the budget that you've already worked up. This is, structurally or otherwise the kind of thing that I would see. So here are a couple of unanswerable questions that this poses to me as a detail guy and a budgeter. First off, what does first year mean? Anybody want to take a stab?
do like the pre-launch up to the launch date?
Right? It's a bit of a trick question because the answer is, who knows,
Oh, no.
right? It's fuzzy. So
Right.
don't use that language. Especially if you want to, if you're thinking pre-launch, well, for some guys, that's 9 months. For some guys, that's 15 months. And that's not really a year. Yeah, it gets messy. So in the tool that we'll be working in today, you'll see, well, let's just call it a calendar year, call it what it is, because that's easier to understand and less fuzzy. All right, next. When do facility and payroll expenses start in said first year?
Yeah, there's no dates, no timeline here whatsoever. So very
Yeah, there's absolutely no dates there. But as soon as you say yes, you're raising your own funds for your own salary. So you're the first on the list. And your second staff member is your facility. So
That's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, actually your facility is going to be your number one. So that person is going to be very, very expensive, especially with the insurances. Anyway, that doesn't really start until you probably start pre-launch, preview services and such as that, but you might have to have a down payment going into it. So you need to think about that too as well.
So this question kind of drives home the point of cash flow. Like when the money comes in is important, especially in relation to when the money needs to go out. So again, the tool that we'll be using will put it in columns by month. So you get a whole 12-month view, because, if a supporting church says, yeah, we'll send you $10,000 or whatever, like if they send that to you in January or December, that's the same year, but that's a huge difference in when you'll be able to use that. All right. When during the year do the big startup costs or the big hits come? Maybe marketing or equipment kind of stuff, right? Same thing, cash flow makes a difference. Where's this money coming from? What you're seeing on screen here isn't actually a budget, it's a spending plan, which is good for what it is, but it's not really a budget, because in the budgeting process, we need to consider where is that money coming from? So we'll work through that today. And then I have a bonus one. It's just a little personal thing, but when we're talking church budgets on orders of thousands of dollars and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, how helpful is it for your tool to have the 0.00 cents on there? Anyway, just a recommendation to clean that up, round it off. It's okay. Doesn't have to be 0.23 cents. All right, so here is a quick preview of the tool. Before we're done, I'm gonna give you a link and you can all load up your own copy and start working in it. But here we've got income and expenses, green and blue sections. You see the columns per month, some basic income categories, some basic high-level expense categories. Clearly not the only tool or the only spreadsheet that could be used, but we'll use it today just to kind of prove out some of these principles, and then also use ours as opposed to trying to create one from scratch. Good heavens, it's ready made for you. The cash flow thing is the gray across the bottom, and so talking about that real quick, the first line, this month's gain or loss. So that one is just saying, hey, did we put money into savings this month, or did we take money out of savings this month? Functionally, even though you may not have an actual savings account, but you get it, right? Was there more income or was there more expense this month? On any given month, there might be more expense, and that's okay, but you can't sustain that forever. If every month there's negative cash flow, at some point you're gonna run out. And so the projected bank balance is just taking a look at, hey, does that number ever get below zero? Because if that happens, then you're gonna make some tough choices about who gets paid, the facility, the staff, right? Kind of thing. So big picture questions about this before we move on. All right. Yeah, again, we'll get to kick those tires and play with that. But let's talk about estimating this income. So you saw this on the spreadsheet, and again, you'll get it in when you load up your own version of it, but there's 3 common income streams for you as you plant. That'd be other churches or sponsoring organizations. So maybe you got a mother church, maybe you've got a like a Waypoint or a CLBA group that's funding you. Often you're raising support from families and friends and individuals. And then of course, you want to be discipling your locals as they come to faith, or as they come from another church, perhaps a few of them. You want to be talking to them about financial disciplines, and so local giving. So those would be the 3 big buckets, and maybe a bonus 4th, which isn't universal, and there's a whole nother like paperwork and accounting structures and things that would go with a for-profit business venture that we can't really touch on today. But let's just acknowledge that some guys are like, yeah, I'm gonna start a coffee shop or whatever, and then plant a church in there. It's another potential income stream, but a whole nother beast. Yeah, questions? All right, we'll keep rolling. So let's talk about estimating income in the fundraising. So this would be true basically of you're supporting churches, organizations, as well as friends and family. I would encourage you to solidify what those commitments mean. So, as you're making the ask in the fundraising realm, hey, would you, support me monthly for what period of time? Indefinitely, for 2 years, for 3 years? Like you'll maybe when you get to the fundraising section, Sean, have we already done?
No, we've not done fundraising yet. So
Okay, so it's
yeah.
coming. So
Yeah.
consider that what you're asking them to commit to. And then when they commit, hey, we're going to do $100 a month. Great. Try to politely get some indication of when that might start, as is appropriate. Certainly if it's a church or an organization, if they say, $10,000 a year in our former example, it's polite, and it shouldn't be offensive for you to ask them, great, when can I anticipate that coming in so I can make plans? And so as you're starting to do your budgeting, is that $10,000 coming in January, or is it coming in November?
And Patrick, just so you guys know, that picture of that chart is we have a fundraising worksheet in the Google Drive under your templates. In the templates folder, fundraising folder, there's a fundraising worksheet that you can basically, the table's already set for you, so that you can just, as you get commitments, you can put it in there. So
yeah, and it'll do all the math for you. Again, it's already built, so you can just put in what's the amount, what's the frequency, so how many installments is, of course, the total commitment on the right-hand column is just doing the math of dollar amount times how many installments. So $50 a month over 3 years is 36 months, comes out to $1,800. And then the total commitments at the top is adding up everything else in that column. So you can get an idea as you're doing the fundraising, where you're at in the process, especially if your organization or your management team or your oversight has set a goal for you, like you need to raise X dollar amount. A tool like this can keep a pretty simple all-in-one place. You can know how you're doing against that. Yeah, be sure to interrupt with questions or comments along the way. So that's relatively straightforward as far as estimating, so you can have an idea of when does it start, how long will it last, those kinds of things. Now let's talk about local giving. So has anybody done, Bruce, probably you're a prime suspect, per capita income? Is that how you've done church offering math in the past?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So what, I'm curious, what do you remember, or what have you seen over the years as a per capita figure?
Well, in the context of the last church in Tampa, it averaged around 25. I always estimated per family. And then that's how I developed you know, the weekly averages.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, so-
it ranged between $25 and $33.
Good. So let's break that down. What does $25 per capita mean? And per family is slightly different, but same idea is if you just add up all the giving for the month and divide it by the weekly attendance for the same month. And then of course divide by 4, so you get the per week. And even if, here's my recommendation for you if you're thinking, well, what about that 5th Sunday that comes up once in a while? Well, my recommendation would be don't factor that in. Just pretend for budgeting purposes that every month is 4 weeks, and then on the 5th week is either gravy on top, icing on the cake, whatever. Or some churches have done like, hey, 5th Sunday offering goes to X local charity, or whatever mission group. It gives you some flexibility around that from a budgeting standpoint. So let's take a look at some real numbers. So hypothetically, there's a church that brought in $8,700 last month. They're averaging 145 attendance. That's men, women, children, everybody, divided by 4 Sundays, which means that there's $15 per capita, Latin for per head. And so what that means is a family of 4 would typically throw $60 in the plate every week. Is that making sense? I know you guys didn't go to seminary for math, but hopefully that's straightforward, simple enough. Good. All right, so we can talk in, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, the reason why you do it at a month as opposed to like every week is because, people don't give every week, but they might give once a month or every other week, because based upon how they pay. And so if you did it every week, it would just be hit or miss kind of to figure out why, but if you take a whole month and then obviously just divide it by the 4, that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, it kind of smooths out the rough edges to the chart too. So especially if you're looking, a year in, you're looking at, hey, what were our numbers from last year, so we can forecast next year. If you're looking week by week, that could be a white knuckle roller coaster because of what Sean just said. But if you take it even a month at a time, it kind of smooths that out a little bit. So where do we go to find out what you can expect per capita in your area? Of course, ask around. What are similar churches in your area seeing? But you also have to take into consideration like new church versus established church. You're typically going to see different per capita figures in that. As you're estimating, I would encourage you to estimate low, kind of worst case scenario kind of math for budgeting purposes. Be conservative on the income estimation, be slightly aggressive on the expense estimation, and then because the reality of what happens is never, even the best budget is going to miss it.
I remember having the saying, and I heard this before: hope for the best, plan for the worst.
There you go. Yeah, I should have that tattooed somewhere on my arm. Pray about it quite a bit. Ask around. There's a little online research that's out there, but it's hit and miss, and you got to take it with a grain of salt again, because even represented in this group, there's different regions, there's different, city to city, you might be, different socioeconomic situations. I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into that. So you kind of have to hyper localize that. What does it look like in my community? What could I reasonably expect? But figure out what that per capita is and then multiply it by 4. And that's, a reasonable projection of local offerings. And by attendance, of course. So is that exactly what's going to happen? No. I mean, it's anybody's guess, but let's have an educated guess, because we need to plan some spending around that. So this gets you in the ballpark at least.
I know, as Patrick said, as a new church, not only hopefully you're reaching people that are far from God, that haven't been to church in a long time, that don't know how church finances work and aren't really sure they should trust God or trust your church. And so I know Tim Cole, we know when they planted their church in Virginia Beach, I've heard stories that they had like an offering one week that was like $9. They had like 300 people, but it was like $9 or something. And they're just like, what? but they're like, well, I guess we're reaching people who are really far from God, and so the whole offering thing isn't. They're not at that point yet. With the relationship with God. And so you just had to take that in consideration. You know, there are some church plants that you're going to start with a launch team of tithers, right? There, you know, maybe like, you know, Bruce's situation, you know, getting people from Fairmont, they might already have, you know, that they've been discipled and they're ready to give. And so you can take that into consideration. But even sometimes you're going to start with Christians that are, you know, they'll give, but they might not trust your church yet. And so, you know, we see that with church plants is after you kind of establish trust, they're like, okay, we trust now that you're going to handle these finances correctly. Now we trust that you're going to be around for more than a year. Now we're going to feel more comfortable giving to this church. So it's not just, hey, we're reaching people who are far from God. It could be, there are going to be Christians that come that aren't trusting you yet. And that's just
Well,
reality.
and look at the stats of how many Christians, those that are their committed, regularly participating Christians, are actually tithing a full 10% of their income. The stats in the North America are like 2% of Christian families do that, which is, anyway, that's a thing. And you may hear this again when you talk about when you get to the module on like building your launch team. What do you do during launch team meetings? Or maybe it comes up in small group or disciple making conversations. But I'll just also plant the seed here by way of telling you a story. So a guy named Phil Ling is a veteran planter. We invite him to Exponential to lead some of our workshops, especially the one that we do on generosity, because he now leads a generosity coaching consultancy kind of thing. Anyway, when he planted in the Pacific Northwest, he told his people, everybody on the ground there, that we're not going to talk about money for the first year at all, which is, you know, it's not a surprising sentiment because you hear the classic complaints about, oh, the church is all about money or whatever. But he says, in retrospect, that was one of his biggest mistakes in planting. You do something like that and you risk communicating that money isn't spiritual or money isn't part of the lordship of Christ in your life. I mean, there's a lot of things around that. Jesus talked about money. I mean, there's all kinds of problematic things. So as you're making your plans and your strategies, somewhere in there, don't make it the most important thing, but it is an important thing to talk to your launch team about giving. So you'll get to decide in that process, like when is that we'll start taking up an offering. Yeah, all right. So coming at it from the other direction, but you know, on the last slide, we took a look at, here's the offering, let's break it down in per capita. So here's going the other way, $12 per capita, 80 attendance, 4 Sundays. You could project about $3,800 a month in local offerings. All right, you get to practice this too in the spreadsheet before we're done.
Patrick, is there, would you say, so I saw 12, I saw 15 in the other slide. Would you say that's kind of, for the church plants that you've been working with recently, is there an average kind of per capita that church planters been using like for the first year?
Yes. I mean, I have a recommendation for you in that. What are they experiencing? I have no idea because I don't see the financial reports down to that level of detail. But I would encourage you to use a figure somewhere in the $10 to $15 per capita range. Yeah, because of what we're talking about, like, you know, new believers don't necessarily start giving generously right away. Even if you're in a more affluent area, it may not be, sometimes that's the worst, because in more affluent area, people may be more, like money may be more of an idol in their life. So yeah, estimate low. When we get to the spreadsheet, I just found new research, recent research about what per capita giving numbers are across the US. So you'll see that in the spreadsheet. It's like hyperlinked and all that kind of stuff. It was a little higher. And of course, you know, inflation plays into all of this. So at some point, maybe I need to start calling it 12 to 18. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But the principle is estimate low. Yeah, other questions about estimating tithes and offerings, local giving before we jump into startup costs. All right, so let's switch over to expenses. So there's two broad categories of expenses. You get the ongoing month over month or every quarter kind of ongoing expenses. But then there's also startup costs. They're things that will typically come up just the once, or maybe not again for a lot of years. But we still need to budget for them so they're not a surprise. Like legal filing fees, you'll probably see. Do I have the numbers on here? Oh yeah, we'll break it down. Legal filing fees, we'll go into depth in each one of these. Computers, branding website, equipment, and then marketing. All right, so legal filing fees, when you get to, Corey, you're in the middle of this right now. Depending on your state, it's crazy different state to state, but on average, mostly what we see is somewhere between 30 and $100 to incorporate and call this new legal entity into existence. There's an annual report in most states, which is $10 to $30, call it 20 maybe on average. And that's just like every year. There's an ongoing aspect of this as well, but it's just a real quick check-in with the state, like who are your current officers, what's your current address, thank you very much, $20 please. So know that that's coming. The IRS wants $600 for their 501c3 application. So you're looking, so $750, give or take, for just the legal paperwork one time. Yeah, questions about legal filing fees without getting in too much into the weeds of legal process. All right. You guys know tech kind of stuff, but put whatever you think you're going to spend, and also be making decisions like, does the church buy you a laptop? Does it buy any other staff that you might have a laptop? Is it going to be BYOD, bring your own device? Those kinds of things, but don't forget to put money in there for that, especially if you need it. Branding and website. So there's a range, and frankly, you could spend as much money as you wanted on branding. Like you could find a branding firm and give them 50 grand if you wanted to. Please don't. You can get pretty good church branding anywhere from $500 to $2,500, and there's a lot of branding agencies that specialize in doing church stuff and do it pretty well. Website design, same idea, anywhere between $500 and $2,500. Of course, there's some DIY options there too. Squarespace and Wix and some of those do a pretty reasonable job, but you can build a website in a day and it looks okay if you have any kind of design background, or if you're an internet user and you kind of have an idea of what websites should look like. But don't forget to put money in there for that. All right, equipment. So outreach equipment. Yeah, let me just focus on that for a second. So maybe this is nothing for you, but maybe it's, hey, we want to own a commercial bounce house jumper. Sean will call it a moon bounce. That we use for outreach events, things like that. Kevin McNeil a couple of years ago got an ice cream truck and wrapped it with the brand and went around to events, sporting events, community events, and handed out free ice cream kind of thing. So if you have, when you get to the outreach section, if you have plans that are going to require some outreach equipment, put that in there into your budget. And then also consider a complete trailer package. So you may have seen these where it's, Church in a Box or Church on Wheels or Portable Church Industries are a couple of brands that are popular, but the idea is you either start with a base package and customize a little bit, but at the end of the day, they roll a trailer up and you unlock it and everything's ready to go. Like you roll out the carts and the audio visuals all in there, all the children's ministry stuff is in there, and then everything goes back in the trailer when you're done, because most of you will be in a portable facility, whether that's a school or a movie theater or community center. So if you're portable, you need some portable equipment that will withstand a couple of years of use and abuse. So again, you can, Portable Church Industries is kind of the Cadillac, the most expensive in the market. You could spend $250,000 with them in a heartbeat on equipment. For most of you, please don't. You can get away with much less, but probably you need to be spending at least 30 grand on your complete trailer package. Let's talk about opportunity cost with this as well. Do you go with one of these companies that's like a turnkey solution, like here's everything all in one package, or do you piecemeal it together yourself and get on Amazon and search for cheaper prices on stuff? Let's process some pros and cons. What do you guys think?
I think it depends on who's on your launch team. If you got some people who are tech savvy and whatnot, you probably can get you could get a better end result by piecemealing and especially if you're able to like, oh, we got this soundboard that's almost new from a church plant that just moved into their facility, don't need it anymore, and we're able to save money there or something like that. I could see you could save some money and still have a quality result.
Yeah, it's a great thought. What else?
Yeah, we have a Ascending Church that's actually an 8-year-old church plant, so they have a bunch of stuff from Portable Church that they're just going to send with me probably. So I think that's a good way to cut the cost. If you could find a church that is in that transition period, because they're building a building right now.
Yeah, so sort of a third option, not buying a new package, but you're also not completely piecemealing it. Love that.
I will have to probably supplement because some of the stuff is pretty beat up after 7 or 8 years, but
Yes, and technology leaps. I mean, good heavens, the advances in like soundboard and speaker technology in 7 years is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think with Carl was talking about, if you got people on your launch team that are gifted in some of these areas, just giving them something to own, I think is a big win for them to be able to contribute and feel like they're a part of the team and just get excited about, hey, this new church plant that they get to be a part of, and hopefully they'll tell their friends about. And the only thing that you got to be careful with, what I've seen, is those volunteers, they typically have like, they're not always seeing like the sustainability of a system that you're going to have to do every single week for a long time. So oftentimes they don't have the big picture in mind. They're thinking of what's the best soundboard, but not thinking about the whole system and how
Durability,
it's a trailer, and how it's going to be durability, and how it's going to be transported to here and there. And so some of it is just going to be like really educating them on what is this really going to mean and take to be able to do this week in, week out in the most sustainable way.
So let me show you from Portable Church website. And let me not forget to mention that this whole slide deck, I'll send it to you as a PDF when we're done. So do take notes along the way, and you can have all this. But they have a couple of like entry level, mid grade, and primo. I mean, look at that Nexus solution up to 350 grand. Whew. Yeah, anyway, I have some thoughts about that personally, but I'll keep them to myself. But probably most of you should be in this, kind of starter. It's good quality equipment kind of thing. So think $25,000 to $80,000 for your typical setup. And, a lot of that is driven by like, how many classrooms do you want to have equipment for? You can have one, you can have 4, that makes a big difference. Some of those kinds of things, you can have full hospitality with coffee brewers and all that kind of stuff. Those are some of those things that you would pick and choose maybe in that process. But here's my warning. I've seen a lot of church planters piecemeal it together themselves. And I get it, because you're also out there fundraising and you want to, pinch every penny and get the most bang. And what you may not see, and what most of them haven't seen, is the opportunity cost of 40, 60, 80 man hours plus of effort. So you're spending 5 hours one day and 3 hours, later in the week, and 8 hours the next week doing Amazon shopping, and then you get in the boxes and you're assembling the system. Like that's time that you should be spending with people. You should be investing in your leaders. You should be out sharing the gospel. You should be doing outreach events. Some of those things you can't do because you're tied up with all your equipment and stuff. So keep that in mind as you're making that call, that decision about which way you go on that. Yeah, opportunity cost is a real thing.
And we'll have another session later on the cohort about facilities and equipment specifically. And we usually got a guy named Derek who comes from churchplant.com that does this for church plants, helps them, creates a system for them that's customizable. So we'll talk more about that, but for budgeting purposes, yeah, think about those statistics, the numbers that Patrick just gave you.
So you'll have a whole nother session on marketing, church plant marketing as well. Our typical recommendation is to put together some version of a blitzkrieg campaign, that you should be hitting your community from land, sea, and air to let them know that the new church is starting weekly worship gatherings. So there's no magic silver bullet in any one of these. So you'll get to customize that again, hyper contextualize that for your, hyper local, what's going to work in your community. You get to be a student, but it might be, some version of online social media, some mass media kind of thing, like a mailer or a door hanger or posters or anyway, it's hard to guess at that now because you don't know exactly what you're going to do, but for estimating purposes for today, use a figure somewhere in the $5,000 to $15,000 range for marketing. 5,000 would lean a little more towards digital, and 15,000 would lean a little more or include more of the physical kinds of things like direct mail and door hangers. And your rule of thumb is you're paying more for those physical things because you're paying somebody else to do the delivering or the door-to-door kind of thing. Questions about that or thoughts? All right, let's burn on. All right, so now we're talking recurring expenses. So facilities, and do beware of the fifth Sunday on facility. I know for estimating income, I said always consider it a 4 Sunday month, but once a quarter, every calendar quarter, one of those 3 months is going to have a fifth Sunday in it. And if you're paying, as most planters do, per week for your facility, don't let that extra $500 or $1,000 or whatever it's going to be catch you by surprise. So plan for that somehow. My template our template that you're going to be using here in a minute will just take that fifth Sunday, divide it by 3 and spread that across the 3 months. So it'll just be an average. Generosity, meaning, will you be tithing forward to church planting? That's a church planting multiplication behavior that we would encourage all of you to start from the very beginning. Set aside 10% of your local tithes and offerings to participate in your own church plant, right? Make disciples that make disciples, that plant churches that plant churches. Some of you may have obligations to send some or all of that to a denomination or a network or whatever. So just, be sure to budget that in. Marketing and outreach, ongoing kinds of things like, maybe you set aside some money to have a big splash at the beginning, but don't let it be a one and done kind of thing. You should have some ongoing marketing and or outreach budget so that you have more events or more online ads that are just ongoing, those kinds of things. Worship gatherings, of course, bring their own expense. Children's ministry, communion, just lots of things around that. Assimilation, maybe you'll do some kind of pizza with the pastor event, or get a free Bible for first-time guests, or whatever those things are. They come with dollar figures, right? Making disciples. These are our categories that'll be in the template here. Making disciples, relatively broad category that would include all the children's ministry, small groups, youth, that kind of thing. Growing leaders would be like, are you gonna go to any conferences, or are you gonna buy books for your leaders to read together to get some common language and common learning kind of stuff? Anyway, maybe you want to plan for that. Operations is the least sexy, of course. That's your website, your emails, your online giving. Don't let that catch you by surprise. There was a church plant I served years ago here in DC, and he had 2 staff, and then he had 3 or 4 interns that were also raising their support to move with him and help plant the church. It was fantastic, and they were killing it. They knew, collectively they were bringing in I don't know, $15,000 or $20,000 a month, but it was almost entirely online, and they get the first credit card processing bill, and it was the better part of $1,000. They just about wet themselves. So don't let that catch you by surprise. And then staff with an asterisk. So let's take a look at this, especially for those of you that have not been hiring managers before. Toby, probably you could speak to this the best from your experience, but the staff price tag is higher than its face value. So hypothetically, you say, hey, we're going to hire you part-time. We'll pay you $1,000 a month. And the person that you're hiring is like, great, that's fantastic. You know, maybe it's worship leader, children's minister, that kind of thing. But you tell them $1,000 and it costs the church more than that. So you've probably seen taxes come out of your own paycheck from time to time. Right? So,
Yeah.
Especially if they're not ordained clergy that has opted out of Social Security, they get to pay Social Security tax, 7.5% comes out of their paycheck, but also 7.5%, the church has to match that. So together it's about 15% that goes to the IRS. So surprise, you're already in for, in our example here, about $77 more than the $1,000 that you said to the employee. There may be, most states are going to pay a workers' comp insurance. You may have other ongoing accounts, at least initially, email accounts, whatever kind of stuff. So anyway, as you're factoring in salary, even for part-time people, you better gross it up by about 10% for the real cost to the church of what it costs to hire somebody. And this isn't even considering any kinds of benefits or any other kind of thing that you might throw in there. So just for the payroll bit, surprise, it's a little higher. Questions about that? Toby, did I miss parts of that?
Well, I was just thinking of, yeah, I figured normally I figure about 15% of whatever their salary is what I put back is typical for, especially Kansas. It just seems like it's always higher.
And that includes like health insurance and those kind of benefits as well?
No.
Including that in the 15?
No,
Oh, so,
insurance would be, right. Yeah,
wow,
health
so plus
insurance would be,
15%.
right.
Okay.
What
Word to the
about
wise.
so Patrick, the budget template that we have takes into consideration the tax, right?
It'll do this math for you. Yep.
It won't do the email account, will it?
No, you have to manually add that one, but it will estimate for you the employer's taxes and the workers' comp insurance. Again, it's just ballparking for you. Don't take it as that's exactly what it's going to cost me.
Right.
But at least the template is designed to reveal that potential blind spot. Make sure you're prepared for it.
It's never just $1,000 or 2,000.
Right. Exactly. Again, you'll get this in the slide deck, but some helpful links is the template, which we'll use here in a second. There's also a sample one where we filled in some hypothetical numbers, so you can see, instead of just a blank one, you can see what, oh, this is what a completed one looks like and how it functions together. There's the fundraising worksheet that Sean mentioned. Of course, Planner Plan, the project, our web app has some step-by-step helps around budgeting. 501c3. Do we do a legal paperwork session this year, Sean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Love this session.
Yeah. So just a quick plug for that the IRS says the churches are automatically 501c3. I take it as kind of a separation of church and state that works in our favor. So as soon as you incorporate, like you can start writing tax receipts with good conscience, even before you get the letter that has your church's name on it that says 501c3, but nobody else seems to know that. Not even their buddies over at the post office will cut us a break on that, even though the IRS has put it in their publication in plain language. Churches need not apply. Anyway, so that's a blog post about more about that if you have questions about that. Also, we didn't really get too deep into ministerial housing allowance. So that's a thing. If you're not familiar with that, start asking around, ask your sending organization or your oversight about what is that, how does that work? How does that help me with my own tax situation? All right, that is my slide deck. So let's get into doing the actual spreadsheet. I think I have a link for you all. Let me go to the chat feature here. And nope, That's the wrong one. All right, hang on. Nope, that should have been it. All right, I'll get it. There it is. All right, if you'll click on that, it will prompt you to make a copy of the master template. That way you can kick the tires and not break my original. And then I would love to have somebody volunteer to put it on screen. I'll kind of talk you through the process, but you can be plugging in the numbers and everybody else follow along with your own spreadsheet. So make a copy, get it loaded up, and then let me know which one of you wants to be my guinea pig for today.
Is that link working for you guys?
I got a
Got it.
couple of nods.
Okay, cool. For me, it asked me to sign into the library, so I was like, I guess it knows me.
I can be your guinea pig here, Patrick.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carl. As soon as you're ready, put it up on the screen there. And of course, the rest of you will have to minimize so you can kind of see him, but also follow along in your own spreadsheet at the same time. All right, so I'll talk you through these instructions, but here they are on the first tab in case you need to come back to them. Let's go on to the assumptions tab, the second tab across the bottom. And this is just an attempt to help you leapfrog or accelerate some of those numbers and get them plugged in. So there in the orange kind of on the right-hand side is that the research from the Unstuck group that says for established churches, their experience is that the average per capita is between 37 and 45, which is a lot higher than I thought. Again, I'm encouraging you to estimate maybe half of that, but
So wasn't it used to be like
Gracious.
32?
the old one that was there was like 28 or something. But anyway, so you start with the date. When do you start fundraising? When's your first preview gathering? When's your launch of worship gatherings? Because when we get into the budget, it's actually going to forecast out 3 or 4 calendar years worth of timetable. So you can use it for a couple of years, but also in part because the IRS, when you get to the 501c3, they want several years worth. That's why we do it so far out. But that those first date fields at the top. Sean, are you able to unlock annotations?
Okay.
Go into your security settings as host. I'd love to have my magic pointer to point things out. Anyway, so those dates will just drive the calendar dates. Again, that'll be all automated, but do some research, find out what your median household income is in your local zip code where you're planting. That's pretty easily found online. And that just maybe helps you contextualize, should I go a little higher or lower on that spectrum? And let us know when maybe you got that change made, Sean, and we'll have Carl share again. Don't spend too much time on it. I'll just talk it out.
I don't see everything's checked and allow participants.
All right. Well, we'll just talk them through it.
Okay.
So yeah, there in the green section is that income section. So punch in some just hypothetical numbers there in the launch box. That is the per capita figure. So yeah, maybe change that to 15, 10, 12, 15, somewhere in that range. Generally, as a rule, for the way the spreadsheet is built, those boxes that have that light gray shading are the ones you should be typing figures into, and everything else is automagic. Awesome, great. And then, yeah, estimate weekly attendance. Again, we're just using hypotheticals today, so punch in whatever. All right, so when we get to the next page that I showed you on screen earlier, those numbers will be like pre-populated for you. All right, so let's talk about facility expenses. What's the weekly facility expense? Schools here in the US average typically would pay somewhere in the $400 a week range. Movie theaters more like $1,000. So put whatever figure you want in there. Most planners don't rent office space right out of the gate. Some do. It's a high value for them. So if that's you, there's a place to put in a monthly rent for the office as well as a start date. But probably line number 24, you're going to have some kind of trailer storage. So you're going to take it to the U-Haul yard or the boat storage lot or something like that. So it's behind a locked gate. Unfortunately, there's a criminal element that has discovered that church trailers equal audiovisual tech, and so they get stolen on a pretty regular basis. So again, depending on your area, maybe $150 a month. Yep. And then if your first preview gathering is in July, maybe you want to start renting the trailer lot in June. So put in June 1 of 23. Yeah, 6/1/23. There you go. All right, so generosity, this would be where you'd put in the 10% to church planting, or maybe you have a 5% split or whatever, you can put it in as a monthly dollar amount or as a percentage. We can just leave that 10% in there for now. Operations, little shameless plug there, line 34 for project management services, but bookkeeping contract. Some of you will have free bookkeeping for a year. Some of you are gonna have to start paying right out of the gate. Church bookkeeping, you're probably looking at $300 to $500 a month if you're paying for it.
And Patrick, let me go back to the generosity. I've seen
Mhm.
guys get this just kind of screwed up. It's an or, so like Carl's got the 10% over there because 10% of the offer is going to go over there. So it's an either or. So don't put one in, we're going to probably give like $500 a month is what we predict, or 10%. Like don't only fill in one of those sides. Don't fill in both columns.
But it is per line though. So for example, let's go back to line 30 where amount to other missions. Go ahead and put in $50 a month in the left-hand column for that one. You just don't put a dollar amount and a percentage in the same line. Yeah, if you do that, it should work.
Yeah.
Go ahead and tab or enter to get out of that box. There you go. All right, and then last section here on the assumptions would be staff, personnel costs. So are you paying a coach? Going rate is about $200 a month. And then will you be on payroll? Punch in what is your start date, and then what is your housing allowance amount and your salary amount. Again, split that out because that'll help us with the spreadsheet estimate your taxes. As well as line 43 would be planner benefits. So Carl, just for sake of argument today, let's make that January 1 of 23. 1/1/23. And then let's say $2,000 housing allowance and $2,500 a month salary, and maybe $500 a month for benefits. So that'd be like MetaShare or something like that. Okay, and you would just follow that same pattern for any other staff expectations that you have, even if it's a year out or 2 years out. Like you can push the hire date way out, but if you wanted to estimate not only the salary, but those other things we talked about, like the taxes and the workers' comp and all that stuff, you put the number here, then it'll pre-populate on the next page. Last thing here on the assumptions before we get to the rest of it is line 60 is a payroll processing contract. Paying your bookkeeper $300 a month does not necessarily include the actual payroll processing. So put maybe $35 a month in there, and that'll, payroll processing would be like they collect the taxes, send it to the government, and set up your direct deposit kind of stuff. All right, assumptions. Let's go to the next tab across the bottom. There you go, budget worksheet. So here's that month by month. Well, let's actually go to the next one across the bottom. It's called the printable budget. Let's work it backwards. This would be the format that is most easily shared to your supervisor or to a management team or to some like approval authority that's going to make a vote on it, because it will spit out 1 year per page in a PDF. And so it keeps it simple, it's high level. So for example, those expense categories, the facility generosity, those are things that we looked at in the slide deck. you can see there's those pre-filled numbers that we were talking about. How in June, there's $150 there for the trailer parking. And then starting in July, there's money for the worship gathering space because you got previews, and the trailer parking is all calculated in there. You got so operations stuff, that'd be the bookkeeping, the staff salary. Anyway, it's all pre-populated to get to leapfrog you there. Now, when we get to, don't click on it yet, but when we get back to the budget worksheet, each one of these expense broad categories, we're going to break it down. So it'll be like a breakout worksheet. There'll be 5 or 8 or 10 kind of subcategories within that. So for example, facilities, Carl, do click on the budget worksheet, tab across the bottom, and then scroll down to the blue facility section. There it is. Yeah, there you go. So there's a half a dozen, they're kind of subcategories. Again, we're just trying to help you not have any blind spots when you're doing your budgeting. Oh yeah, we really have to spend money on that such and such. You know, if you fill in those gray boxes there, then it'll roll up the row 41. You see the total facilities line there. It'll do all that math for you and then take that number and put it into your printable budget as the high level. This is all of our facilities rolled up together into one expense. Is that making sense conceptually?
Right.
Okay.
So I can
So
go
then,
and add extra like one-time costs in here. Is that what you're saying?
exactly. So for example, row 52 is branding. So let's say you decided to spend $2,000 on branding, but which month are you going to spend that? So go ahead and take a guess and put it in one of those boxes based on the month you think you would spend $2,000 in our hypothetical for a church plant next year. Again, you're having a grand opening in September. Your previews start in July. Probably your branding needs to happen in advance of that.
Right.
There you
Or
go.
like custodial appreciation. Like you think about, oh, we're going to be meeting in the school. Oh man, it would be great if that custodian that opens the building every Sunday for us, and we're building a relationship with we should probably budget something in November, December to give them a Christmas gift. You know, you can then put that in there so it's in the budget.
Right. So these subcategories here that are italicized, these aren't, you don't have to spend money in every one of these, but it's supposed to be an exhaustive, get you to think around all the different angles of each of these categories so you don't forget and have a big whammy surprise later. So here's then the rest of the work of the budgeting is really here on the budget worksheet tab. Is it just top to bottom, row by row, how much are you going to spend for each of these things, if any, how much you're going to spend, and in which month are you going to spend it? There you go. And again, right now we haven't considered any income. So all of our monthly gain loss and our projected bank balance is all out of whack.
Yeah, the only income you have is local giving, which doesn't start until like September. Yeah.
Yeah. In most of our circumstances, the planters that we support, like the 10% tithing forward to church planting starts with whatever you're calling the public grand opening or the launch day of your worship gatherings. And so prior to that, local giving isn't really calculated, and certainly that tithe forward isn't calculated. So let's punch in a couple of income numbers here real quick, just for grins. If you scroll all the way back to the top to the green section. Again, your 3 main income kind of categories or streams. So your partner organizations, your outside support, so that'd be friends and family. Local giving is the 4th one down, and then there's that 3rd one that's other income. That'd be business income, or if you plan on like, yeah, I'm gonna have all my volunteers pay for their t-shirt. You know, if they give you $10 for each t-shirt, that's income to the church, but it's not a charitable donation. They're actually buying something for that. So you know, if that's part of your plan, specific plan, you would budget for that. So let's put in some fake numbers. So let's say partner 1 in row number 6 there gives you 15 grand in January to get started. Okay, and then partner two, say they give you $1,000 a month. So punch in $1,000 there. You head out of that. Oh, look at you, know the tricks with the spreadsheet. If you grab that little handly thing and then drag it to the right, it copies everything out for you. Boom. Yeah, so that's the basic idea, is just start punching in the numbers. And so now you circle back to, you have friends and family or churches or organizations that are making fundraising commitments to you. Yeah, we will give you X dollar amount beginning such and such a date. Now you start to put those numbers in here and have an idea, a realistic picture of cash flow. When's that money coming in? Is it enough at the right time? So congratulations, you now have a plan to be solvent through March.
Yes.
All right, so click back on printable budget so you can see some of those updates and changes that we made there. There's your $2,000 in marketing and outreach. That was that branding figure that you put in. Hit the printer icon across the top. It's in your toolbar. There it is. So it won't spit out a piece of paper. It actually spits out a PDF. But if you scroll up and down, you can kind of see you get 1 year per page. So it should be relatively straightforward, like, hey, management team, or hey, supervisor, here's my proposed budget. What do you think? Can we approve it? All right, you can cancel out of that. And then one other built-in tool that might be handy is that last tab across the bottom, the summary budget. And this is all 4 years on one page. So if you scroll down, this is super high level budget that might be helpful in a fundraising setting. Maybe you're pitching to a missions team at another church that's has the ability to write you a big check. Like, here's our 4 year financial plan. Like, we've really thought it out. We've made some plans. We're not just shooting from the hip, flying by the seat of our pants. Use it or don't, but it's pre-built. As long as you've done all the work on the budget spreadsheet, all your numbers will automatically pre-populate in here. And then you've got a one on a page kind of tool that might be helpful for brochures or presentations or whatnot. All right, Sean, where do you want to take it from here for today with budgeting?
Can you share, so you put in housing allowance. Can you just do a quick overview of how do you determine what your housing allowance can be or should be?
Let me pull up the housing allowance spreadsheet that you'll get the link to. Let's see. And I'll put that on screen here. All right. Of course, we put a disclaimer on here because it's a tool to try to help you, but it's not tax advice. So know what you're doing. But here's the idea: is what tax year are you looking at for making these calculations? But it'll just walk you through common housing allowance kind of categories and expenses. You have insurance, you have landscape service, so you're going to be buying furniture. What are your utilities? You can punch in all those numbers here, either monthly or annually. If you're renting, what is your monthly rent? Anything else that goes along with that. If you're a homeowner, slightly different categories. You get a mortgage payment, you've got maybe flood insurance, you got a homeowners association, whatever. But it'll do all that math for you. So these fictitious numbers that are here. And so this last page is then a printable request. So you could say, hey, management team or denomination or whoever's responsible for approving your housing allowance, thank you for paying me X dollar amount salary per year. Would you please designate this amount of it, $2,000 a month or $24,000 for the year, as ministerial housing allowance? And so this is just a quick way to help you calculate what that would be, how much you could set aside. And what can I tell you about that? A couple of things. Housing allowance, real quick, let me plug. So what this does is you get that if you're ordained, licensed, or commissioned as a minister, then you qualify for housing allowance. Your board has to approve that. but you get that portion of your income tax free, which is woohoo, right? But it's not Social Security tax free. So let me talk you through what that looks like, because it happened again to one of my planters this year, and we always try to head this off at the pass. And fortunately, we caught it before it was a big emergency, but not from day one. So for the planter, some ministers opt out of Social Security. So there's a process here in the United States. If you're a conscientious objector to the Social Security system and public insurance, you can fill out a form with the IRS saying, I object to that whole thing and I won't participate. And they'll say, okay, you're a minister, you have the right to do that. You can still get housing allowance. In that case, if you've opted out for those reasons, then you get the housing allowance income completely tax-free. There's no income tax, there's no Social Security tax because you've opted out of Social Security. You also don't get to collect when you retire. But for those of you that might be in the category of, I have housing allowance, but I'm still opted into Social Security, here's the problem that results. And I can send you a link to this if you want. I wrote up a blog article with some fictional numbers to try to demonstrate what happens. But if you remember, we're estimating for the salary where there's the 7.5% that comes out of the employee's paycheck, and there's the 7.5% that the employer has to pay. On the housing allowance portion, that entire 15% goes on you as the minister. And so you have to be setting aside that money. Otherwise, when you go to file your taxes the next year, as this planter this year was about to find out that he had a $3,000 to $5,000 tax bill that was coming due. Surprise! You're in ministry, you can totally afford that, right? So there's some ways around that. Not only work with whoever your CPA or tax advisor is to figure out what your housing allowance should be, but then also how do you save for that? You can just put money aside in your own savings account every month. There's a sort of IRS savings plan. Frankly, it's the one that I use just because it's easier for my family. And that is when I filled out the W-4, I said, please also withhold X dollar amount from my paycheck. And the IRS takes that, my payroll processor sends that money out of my paycheck every month to the IRS. And then when my tax bill comes due, I've already prepaid those taxes. Anyway, don't let that one catch you by surprise. So if you have housing allowance, but you're opted into Social Security, make sure you're budgeting money to pay for the taxes for that housing allowance. Part of what makes this confusing is if you've been in ministry in the past, some churches will say, hey, that 7.5%, we don't have to pay it anymore because it's on the housing allowance portion. So woohoo, we save money. Why don't we just give that to the employee? It doesn't cost us anymore. We're gonna have to spend that money anyway. And so they just put the 7.5% into your paycheck, which is a fantastic thank you generosity kind of thing. And confuses us further because some guys that have been in ministry, like, I never had to save for taxes for, the housing allowance or whatever. Like there's a whole lot of confusion around all of that. So questions? Yes, what experience, good or bad, have you had with ministerial housing allowance?
I know one thing that I've heard church, one CPA advised a church planter to kind of overestimate what they'll need for housing allowance. Because then at the end of the year, she's like, well, they'll ask you, like, did you use all of this in housing allowance? And you can say, no, I didn't end up using all of it. So I'm going to be taxed on $2,000 or something that I didn't use. But, if you underestimate and you end up buying a house, or you end up, making a big expense, buying and putting a roof on, or, you have a big expense, you can't, get it back. If you underestimated, like you can't go back and take the money back, the government's already got it. So she recommended kind of overestimating, not too much, obviously, because then you have a bigger tax bill, but, try to kind of overestimate a little bit. And then when you're doing your taxes, then just be honest with what you actually did spend. Right.
So let me restate it from another angle. Is, in this scenario, we say, hey, would you please set aside $24,000 of my total pay for the year as housing allowance? If your actual expenses at the end of the year with all your receipts is $23,000, then you just say with your tax preparer, hey, there's $1,000 that I didn't utilize of my housing allowance that goes back into the salary bucket, and you do have to pay income tax on that. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's not a particular penalty. Best you can do is estimate. But conversely, if you said 24,000, but your actual receipts tallied up to 28,000, you just left $4,000 of tax-free income on the table. So in that scenario, if you would have estimated 28,000 and used 28,000, woohoo. But if you estimated 28 and it came in at 23, then you would just pay the income tax on that $5,000 difference.
Well said.
So another quick tip, if you're in housing allowance, there are apps that are out there to help you save your receipts, because frankly, that's one of the hardest parts of the housing allowance, is remembering to save all those receipts all the time, every month. Anyway, there's like, I use one that's actually meant for expense reports. And I just use it as my housing allowance. And so whenever there's a receipt, I just take a quick picture with my phone. It reads the receipt. By the time I get back in there, it already knows who's the payee, what's the dollar amount, what's the date. It could calculate any handwritten amounts. Like, there's some fancy stuff that's out there that makes it pretty easy to keep track of your receipts. There's no reason to let that stop you or let it be complicated.